The committee will come to order, please. Take your seat. The committee will come to order, please. Be seated. The committee will come to order as we resume our hearings on the vital issue of the use of American passports as travel documents in the furtherance of the objectives of the communist conspiracy. Now, Mr. Paul Robeson, are you now, or have you ever been, a member of the Communist Party?
Would you like to come to the ballot box when I vote and take out the ballot and see? I thought I was here about some passports.
We will get to that in just a few moments. You are here, sir, because you are promoting the communist cause.
This is complete nonsense. The reason that I am here today, from the mouth of the State Department itself, is because I have struggled for years for the independence of the colonial peoples of Africa. The other reason is that when I am abroad, I speak out against the injustices, against the Negro people of this land. I am not being tried for whether I am a communist. I am being tried for fighting for the rights of my people who are still second-class citizens in this United States of America. My ancestors baked bread for George Washington's troops when they crossed the Delaware, and my own father was a slave. I stand here struggling for the rights of my people to be full citizens in this country, and they are not. And that is why I am here today. You want to shut up every Negro who has the courage to stand up and fight for the rights of his people.
All right, that's enough. You speak of prejudice against the Negro, but what prejudice are you talking about, sir? You graduated from Rutgers, and you graduated from Columbia University. Hell, I remember seeing you play football at Lehigh.
The success of a few Negroes, including myself or Jackie Robinson, cannot make up for $700 a year for thousands of Negro families in the South. My father was a slave. And I have cousins who are sharecroppers. And I do not see my success in terms of myself. And I will not argue with a representative of the people who, in building America, wasted 60 to 100,000 million lives of my people, black people drawn from Africa, for 60 to 100 million black people dying in slave ships and on plantations.
That's not what we're here for. I have endured all I can of this.
Can I read my statement?
No, you may not. This meeting is adjourned.
I think it should be. And you should adjourn this forever. That is what I would say.
The State Department has consistently alienated our friends and appeased our enemies. You're empowered as the State Department's first standalone Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer. Your mandate is to promote a concept on the left called equity, which I think is nothing more than brazen discrimination.
DEI is an ideology based in cultural Marxism. I just don't know how we can continue to have leadership that advocates for this divisive policy.
Our service academies are meant to serve as our primary commissioning source of officers. It now appears that they are a breeding ground for leftist activists and champions of DEI and critical theory. Now, not all, but some, and some is way too much.
There's an old saying which you've probably heard. History doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes. And in this case, the deafening sound of the gavel of censorship once again threatens to stifle our artistic freedom and suppress our democracy. As we look out at the political and social landscape of America in the age of Trump, it's hard to ignore the notes of authoritarian repression blaring throughout the culture, notes which eerily echo those of the McCarthy era. Ideas are once again deemed unacceptable and banned from school textbooks and libraries. Historical monuments or museums that tell the truth about America's racial history are revised, edited, censored, or otherwise attacked for deviating from the standard patriotic script. One clear theme emerges. Those in power are deathly afraid of certain stories and particular narratives being heard. Stories about injustice, stories about inequality, stories told from the perspective of those whose lives have long been considered less central to the nation's story than those of others. But these parallels between the assault on ideas in the past and present are even clearer than many realize. Although it has been largely ignored in most retellings of the McCarthy era and the Hollywood blacklist, such as Trumbo or Good Night and Good Luck, much of that attack, as with the recent war on so-called wokeness, was about silencing the voices of Black artists and intellectuals. During the anti-communist Red Scare, to be Black was often to be seen as also red. Black artists and intellectuals like Paul Robeson, Lorraine Hansberry, W.E.B. Du Bois, and Lena Horne were cast as inherently suspect because their anti-racist politics challenged the status quo or intersected with anti-colonial struggles around the world. They were targeted not because they were weak, but because their cultural and popular power threatened to enter mainstream film and television. The period not only ruined careers and livelihoods, it altered what sort of stories were deemed to be acceptable by the powers that be. The Red Scare narrowed Hollywood's political range, pushing studios away from films that tackled themes about structural racism and made films by Black artists or about race far harder to finance, distribute, or keep in circulation. Films like No Way Out, Pinky, and Intruder in the Dust were banned in several cities, especially in the South, for fear they would stir up dissension between whites and Blacks. And in the case of Intruder in the Dust, cuts were made before the film was released so as to placate Southern audiences and regional censors. In the contemporary moment, Black scholars and cultural institutions that foreground themes of anti-Blackness, racism, and international solidarity are branded as divisive, hate-filled, or un-American. McCarthyism used blacklists in Hollywood and other industries, making people unemployable based on their beliefs or perceived ideologies. Like today, there were mass firings of federal workers targeted as disloyal for being Black, LGBTQ, or civil rights activists. Under Trump, similar dynamics play out through threats to broadcasters, nonprofits, and universities that platform critical voices. College and university leaders face an authoritarian shakedown in which funding, research support, and political protection are conditioned on curtailing woke speech. Recognizing the centrality of anti-Blackness to both the McCarthy era and the present moment is crucial. When we allow the racial component of American authoritarianism to fall out of the frame, we miss the key driver of the assault on democracy. The powerful have always known that Black storytellers and communities represent the core of democratic aspiration in the U.S. and have been at the forefront of the fight to achieve it. That's why silencing them has been such a crucial part of the authoritarian playbook, from the banning of anti-slavery publications, to the blacklisting of Black entertainers in the 1950s, to the violence meted out against civil rights activists, to the current war on woke. As censorship and the erosion of democratic norms have proceeded at an alarming pace over the last year, we must focus on the connections between defending narrative freedom and a functioning multiracial democracy. We must also shine a light on American cinema as a key battleground for this war over who America belongs to. Just as we are resisting through protest and with our vote, we must also fight to preserve the narrative independence that allows us to stand up for the communities who are being written out of the American story. McCarthyism and its violent return remind us that we ignore history at our peril. That is why we must resist the censor's gavel that will stifle the telling of an honest and inclusive story of us. That is true independence.
Now, please welcome to the stage Sundance Board member, professor of law at Columbia and UCLA, and executive director of the African American Policy Forum, Kimberlé Crenshaw.
Good evening and welcome. The gavel you just heard functions then and now as a weapon of erasure, one that interrupts, one that suppresses the story of us. The gavel signifies whose voices count, whose ideas are dangerous, whose freedom to tell has to be managed, monitored, or removed. It silences what I call backtalking, the act of turning a critical eye to things we are told are unfixable or just the way things are. Tonight, we take up the legacy of McCarthyism to revive the legacies of backtalkers whom the Red Scare hoped to bury, and also to analyze how we continue to wrestle with its long shadow. In the 1950s, the tools were subpoenas, hearings, and blacklists. Its casualties were not only writers, directors, actors, and other creators, but also a would-have-been archive of storytelling that could have opened up a wider vision of who we are. Those tools have surfaced again today through hearings, executive orders, and intimidation, along with newer ones layered on top: copycat censorship laws in dozens of states, the polarization of social media, and automated keyword screening that flags and censors content when unacceptable terms appear. The new normal, the world we have now inherited, is one of censorship by orders and by acquiescence. In the 1950s, government and industry sought to purge subversives, hunting artists like Paul Robeson and Hazel for talking back to the racial order, insisting on equal dignity and respect. Today, they hunt people who speak the language of equal dignity and respect. So we're gathering here as a community of artists and thinkers living under that particular threat. Tonight is about naming the power of that gavel so we are better prepared to resist it. As the late Bob Redford said, the word to be underscored is independence. I've always believed in that word. So carrying his vision forward, we ask, what does independence require in this moment? How do we as storytellers, as independent storytellers, respond to the veil of censorship and other forces seeking to silence the story of us? Paul Robeson reminds us, every artist must decide now where he stands. He has no alternative. There is no standing above the conflict on Olympian heights. There are no impartial observers. Welcome to the story of us. So to navigate this critical conversation, please join me in welcoming Ava DuVernay, groundbreaking cinematic storyteller whose works include 13th, Selma, Origin, and When They See Us. Among her many honors, she is a Golden Globe and Academy Award nominee and the first African-American woman to win Best Director right here at Sundance with A Wrinkle of Time. And with A Wrinkle of Time, she was the first African-American woman to direct a film with a budget of $100 million. I am so thrilled to welcome again to the story of us, Viet Thanh Nguyen. A professor of English at USC, Viet is a Pulitzer Prize-winning author whose work includes The Sympathizer, which was made into an HBO series, The Committed, and a new book of essays called To Save and Destroy, Writing as an Other, right on topic. Thank you for joining us again. And finally, please welcome Jacqueline Stewart. Jacqueline is a professor of cinema and media studies at the University of Chicago and is a pioneering film scholar and curator. She is a host for Turner Classic Movies and was the inaugural president of the Academy Museum of Motion Pictures. Her pioneering work underscores how preservation is essential in the fight for a more inclusive story of us. Now, also, please welcome our 3 performing artists. Kara Young is a 2-time Tony Award-winning actor, winning for Purpose and for Purlie Victorious. Of course, that means she is one of the most celebrated performers on the contemporary stage. We are also delighted to welcome Jon Michael Hill, a Tony-nominated actor, for his Broadway performance in Purpose. He is a long-term member of the Steppenwolf Theater Company and also known for his work on the television shows Elementary and Detroit 187. And lastly, please welcome Justin Emeka, director and theater maker who is currently a resident director at Pittsburgh Public Theater and a professor of theater and Africana studies at Oberlin College. He is a valued partner of AAPF in our artivism. His work centers on history, community, and memory. Please welcome all of our guests. Now, let's get into it. As the video powerfully shared, the repression of artists and academics who spoke out against racial exclusion 70 years ago is not only an untold dimension of that past, but it also underscores how the essential grammar of censorship is something that...
Hold it right there. I have a very important announcement to make. From this day forward, the usage of the following words and concepts in federal programs and grant proposals will trigger an immediately review and presumptive rejection as embodiments of the scourge of wokeness. And herein, they are declared to be improper ideology. And so these words must be thoroughly and irreversibly eradicated. First and foremost, black community, cultural competence, disability, disadvantaged, discrimination, equal opportunity, evidence-based, historically, inclusivity, intersectionality, mental health, oppression, people of color, who is that? Privilege, peanut allergies, because all allergies matter. Queer, racism, safe drinking water, trans anything, vaccines, and finally, most importantly, women.
So, this might seem like fiction, but that right there was real. That's a real list that has been promoted by our regime in power to purge ideas, grants, projects that utilize these particular words. This is our new normal. What we want to talk about is what the implications of the effort to erase the grammar that's necessary to tell a fuller story of us, what the implications of that may be for cinematic filmmakers. So last year, we came together in the days after the insurrectionists were released from custody, and we considered film's role in facilitating the exclusionary view that made them think that they were defending a country that was being taken away from them. And we looked at The Birth of the Nation, which used brilliant cinematic storytelling to sear this idea of who this country belongs to into the deep consciousness of Americans. Tonight, we are exploring the afterlife of another moment in our history, the afterlife of McCarthyism, and how it too created a troubling baseline for how Hollywood depicts race, how it distorts the story of us through its censorship, through its repression, and through punishment. So we started with Paul Robeson, and I think if we were to ask most Americans to name subjects who experience career-destroying consequences of repression, assuming that they knew about it, first of all, right? But those who know about McCarthyism, if you were to ask them, name us some names, they probably would tell you Trumbo. They probably know that. Or tell us a story. They probably could tell you the story of Good Night and Good Luck. But probably precious few of them could tell you a story about Paul Robeson. They probably wouldn't name Harry Belafonte or Lena Horne or Sidney Poitier. And probably less than 1% of them would know about Canada Lee or Hazel Scott, who together were the Michael B. Jordan and the Beyoncés of their days. Imagine 50 years from now, no one knowing who Beyonce was, because the effect of erasure that she ever existed. Just imagine. So we've also lost the perspective of how far blacklisted artists fell from the heights that they were once on. So Paul Robeson, who some said was the most famous American on earth at the time, went from earning about $2 million a year to less than $75,000. And it wasn't just that he was no longer employable in Hollywood. His name was erased from awards. His name was erased from textbook. Even owning one of his records was enough to make a person's loyalty be questioned. That is the strength and the power of the Red Scare and the erasure that it created. So what we want to do is try to recover some of that history and understand why it is critical to make sense of the crisis that's facing us today. So I want to start first with Jacqueline to just ponder for a minute what seems like a perfect crime. So first, artists who questioned the status quo were blacklisted. And later, the stories about this blacklisting focuses on just some of those who lost their careers. So as I said, we know about Trumbo, we know about The Way We Were, but those focus pretty much exclusively on white creators. We don't know much about the others, and we especially don't know about what storytelling was interrupted by that suppression. So tell us what became unspeakable, things that were starting to be part of storytelling that then suddenly, abruptly, were no longer speakable.
Yes, thank you. Thanks for the question. And it's great to see this room so full of people who are here for this urgent conversation. So thank you for being here. There were a couple of films that were referenced in the video that we watched at the opening, like No Way Out, Sidney Poitier's first starring role. This is a film in which he plays a young, very handsome doctor who faces a virulently racist white patient who calls him every name, spits on him. And the film almost starts to do something radical in the way that it's going to represent this insurgent Black resistance, but it stops short. And I think that we can say that about so many films about African-American experience that were released during this period, that there was an attempt, sometimes there was an impulse by filmmakers, very I guess, well-meaning white liberal filmmakers to address some of the most urgent issues regarding race in America, but they always stopped short. And there was always this kind of silencing, and there would always be this way in which the films never felt authentic to Black audiences. And I think that that's exactly the kind of thing that this kind of red baiting and this building up of fear created in Hollywood. It was almost worse in some cases that they tried to tell a liberal story and then just didn't really do it. So I think back to a filmmaker like Oscar Micheaux, one of the pioneers of African-American cinema, who made like over 40 films between 1918 and 1948. And he is someone who could not have been active in mainstream filmmaking precisely because his work was grounded in the authenticity of Black stories. So I think that any attempt that there could have been made during that time for Black writers and directors, many of whom tried, like Langston Hughes, like Zora Neale Hurston, incredible, brilliant talents, but there was always this barrier that had to do with not going too far in terms of empowering Black people to tell their own stories.
Yeah. And one of the things about recovering some of these films that made the effort, that pushed the envelope, films like Pinky, films like No Way Out, is that it complicates our belief that we are always on an upward trajectory, right? When in fact, sometimes the films in the 40s were going a little bit further out there than the films of the 50s or even the 60s. So there's this ebb and flow, there's this pushing forward and then the retrenchment that forms, pressure to go backwards. So some part of recovering history is recovering this back and forth, right? Understanding the baseline against which we tell modern stories is actually shaped by these moments in the past where some of these stories were erased or, made impossible to really get funded. Ava, I want to come to you. Biographers of Paul Robeson often argue that without Robeson's global activism, there wouldn't have been Martin Luther King. Yet the same repressive technologies, the same repressive ideas that were used against Dr. King that you talk about, that you include in the frame of the telling of that story in Selma, were actually, we might say, beta tested on people like Robeson a decade earlier. I think historically we have a sense of what it meant to the movement to label Martin Luther King the most dangerous man in America. We have a sense of what COINTELPRO actually did to the freedom moment. Do we have a parallel understanding about how this surveillance and the suppression that happened in the 50s against Black storytellers and Black stories actually did the damage that it might be doing that we're still living under?
Yeah. This is what I'm just a filmmaker with all these big brains up here. So you all have to
come on, y'all.
Really bear with me. Really bear with me. One thing I just want to say off the bat is this room is beautiful from this vantage point, and that we should really embrace moments of convening like this. The goal is to have them become more and more rare. And so this is the last dance for folks that have been to Sundance before. So tender to leave this particular Park City space behind, but we have to take this room with us and the feeling of it and convening and creating space wherever we go, wherever we are, whether we're Sundance and otherwise, Park City or otherwise. So anyway, hat tip to Sundance. But yeah, what comes up in the answer to your question when you're talking about McCarthyism and COINTELPRO and the surveillance of Black storytellers and what that has done to constrict voice and imagination, I won't say imagination, voice, and reach and access. It's something that we are experiencing now, I feel very acutely, through artists that are interested in speaking about Palestine. It's not so far off that we're really encouraged not to talk about it, encouraged not to wear the button to the thing, encouraged not to go to the Q&A for that particular movie, that Palestinian movie, encouraged not to amplify or even distribute these films. Most of the films that are coming out around Palestine and Gaza from Palestinians don't even have distribution. And so it's not a far off concept for me to think about how do you create art, how do you move imagination forward, how do you tell stories in an environment that makes saying some things unacceptable writ large. You can't get booked on the morning shows. You're not going to get that double truck review with the two pages. Some ads aren't even accepted. This is a reality for Palestinian filmmakers and filmmakers about Gaza, filmmakers making films about Gaza. So I don't think we have to kind of only think back to kind of wonder what it's like. We're in the midst of artists who are currently being censored. And we're in the midst of people who support those artists being discouraged from doing so. And so it is incumbent upon us to learn lessons from the past. You look at Robeson, you look at Michaud. You know, Oscar Michaud was distributing and exhibiting his own work, as I learned from this queen right here. We have to think about what is success outside of the mainstream. And that's what we've learned from Sundance. That's what I've learned from Sundance. So no, he may not be, we may not remember him as widely as an Orson Welles or a, I don't know, what are the other ones? Or D.W. Griffith, right? But the people that he made those films for know him. And Oscar Michaud took those films from community to community, from city to city, and played them for the people that he made them for, which was Black people. And he is remembered and his name is known. And so I think also for artists, it's a question of our proximity to success. What is the center for you? And more, I have come to realize for myself that it is to be close to the people that I am telling it for, not necessarily to the people who will pay me, or the people who will deem it an achievement or a claim. If I'm going to be a storyteller, then we have to strip ourselves of chasing this thing that really is so outside of the story. And so when I think of Robeson, when I think of some of the blacklisted filmmakers who continue to write the script, continue to make films for smaller audiences, but still robust, still saying what they wanted to say, and realizing that right now, realizing that this has happened before, we can see the repetition, we can see the patterns, and it's incumbent upon us to learn the lessons and not duplicate them. And again, the way not to do it is to not to, it's hard to say, not to want that thing, right? Not to want them to give us permission, not to want them to say it's okay, not to want it. Last thing I'll say, on this historic day, because I know him, I will tell you, Tessa's here, other people here, Ryan Coogler was gonna make Sinners whether they liked it or not, okay? He's gonna make it whether they liked it or not, just that exact way he made it, right? Just that, and Robeson and King and Nkrumah and Lumumba and Sankara, anyone you want to say, everyone who did anything to move the Black voice forward rejoices in that film, separate and apart from what the industry has said it means, because it will always mean its own thing separately. And so we have to recenter ourselves and get really sober about where we are. And if we want to be artists, we need to put our big boy and girl pants on and realize that we may not always have the awards, we may not always have the money, but if you're storytelling, you're an artist and you have to do it, then do it, and you will find like-minded people who want to hear you.
Yeah, thank you, Ava. Thank you. So Viet, you have explored how international threats have been used to justify domestic repression. Along these lines, you've also noted that while the state has swapped yesterday's label of communist and subversive for today's labels of terrorist and woke, the playbook remains kind of the same. A global conflict then gets used to criminalize domestic dissidents, especially traditionally marginalized and immigrant groups in the United States. So can you uncover some elements of this that happened in the 50s and its potential connections to some of the things happening now?
Sure, thank you so much. I think one thing we have to understand is that the most important American religion is capitalism. You could say, oh, maybe Christianity is more important, but I'll bet that if you put your average American to a test and say, you have to choose capitalism or Christianity, they'll choose capitalism. And in fact, we have evidence already. They chose Donald Trump. That is the most explicit evidence that capitalism matters more than Christianity. And you said that Martin Luther King Jr. was the most dangerous man in America of his time. And I would say that that's true. And it's not only because he stood up for civil rights and black empowerment, but because he criticized the American military-industrial complex and he criticized capitalism. In his speech Beyond Vietnam, which I'm pretty sure most people in this room have never read, even though you can find it easily online, he said the United States is guilty of not just racism, but militarism and extreme materialism. You cannot say that. So there is a literal red and black line in this country, and I'll say yellow line too. In order to enter into the American conversation and be accepted, you have to apologize and you have to confess, especially if you have any taint of communism. So that's what we saw with Paul Robeson. He refused to apologize, he refused to confess, and the system attempted to crush him. Now, if you're an Asian immigrant and you come from a country that is somehow affiliated with communism or an anti-communist war, like Korea, Vietnam, the Philippines, China, you have to say, I'm not a communist. And you say it explicitly or you say it implicitly, but you have to say it. And so when we go back to the 1950s, what we see is the Chinese confession program. And it's a predecessor to everything we're seeing today. You're seeing people being deported, dragged off the streets, murdered. All these things happened to Chinese immigrants starting in the 19th century. The first racist exclusionary immigration laws were directed at the Chinese. The Immigration and Naturalization Service was created to police Chinese immigration. Angel Island Detention Center was the first detention center for immigrants. So while Ellis Island welcomed you if you were white, you didn't have to show any papers. If you were Chinese coming into the United States from the West Coast, you were detained in Angel Island. People committed suicide in there. People were killed in there. You can visit Angel Island Detention Center and read the poems that the Chinese immigrants wrote there decrying what was being done to them. But it's in Chinese. So if you want to read what's written in English, you have to read the accounts of Asian Americans who tend to be apologetic and compliant with American capitalism. And so the stereotype about Asian Americans that we're the model minority is somewhat true, but it's been a socially and politically engineered situation. And so the Chinese confession program, what happened in the 1950s is that the Chinese were pressured to confess. First of all, they had to confess that they were undocumented because a lot of them were. And then they had to confess and name names of people who were communists or ostensibly communists. And that's exactly what's taking place today, except with a different affiliation about loyalty. So I want to end, though, not with this idea about apology and confession, but the idea of resistance, that you can resist, you're just going to pay a price for it. And I want to name names. But I'm not going to name the names of communists because I'm afraid of them. I want to name the names of Asian American radicals who existed and who have been ignored, who have been erased, and who have been overshadowed. That would be writers like H.T. Chang, who wrote And China Has Hands in the 1930s. Carlos Bulosan, who wrote America's in the Heart in 1946. He was a lauded American writer, even though he was a communist, because in the 1940s, as with Paul Robeson, you could stand with the Soviet Union and still have a platform. By 1956, Carlos Bulosan, a Filipino immigrant from a colonized country who was a Marxist labor organizer, was dead of alcoholism and persecution by the FBI on the steps of Seattle City Hall. Yuri Kochiyama, Japanese-American activist who cradled Malcolm X as he was dying. Grace Lee Boggs, who was partnered with James Lee Boggs as two of the most important radical thinkers in the United States in the later half of the 20th century. So Asian American radicalism exists, but it's overshadowed because these people didn't apologize and they did not confess, but they existed and their names should be heard.
Thank you. So we've been hearing about the deeper, complicated dimension of what the Red Scare was all about. There's a way of reading the perpetrators of the Red Scare as basically only being concerned about and pursuing limitations of artistic freedom or the ability to think what you want to think. We read them as, basically just anti-communist. What we don't read them is racist. We don't understand the degree to which simply promoting the idea of equality and equal justice or demanding respect on a set as an artist would also get you branded as a communist. Black artists who tried to talk back against this smear seem to misunderstand what was at stake. Artists like Hazel Scott.
The session of the House Un-American Activity Committee will come to order. Ms. Scott.
Mr. Chairman and honorable members of the committee, I appreciate your granting my request to appear voluntarily before the House Un-American Activities Committee. I appear as an American citizen. I appear as a musician, a member of the artistic profession to which I have long belonged and which has rewarded me with many satisfactions in my life.
We are not here for that, Ms. Scott. There are many that are accusing you.
This is the day for the professional gossip, the organized rumor monger, the smear artist with the spray gun, a few cunningly contrived lies, some false statements, an impressively long list such as red channels, and the years of preparation, sacrifice, and devotion are killed. We should not be written off by the vicious slanders of little and petty men. Little and petty men. Little and petty men. Little and petty, vicious men. That was me back when I thought that the truth mattered. When I thought I had nothing to hide, so I had nothing to fear. That was me when 3 days a week, I was looking directly into America's living rooms as the first African American to host a variety show. My very presence saying, I am your equal. That was me when I refused to pretend that civil rights were some radical fantasy instead of a moral necessity. That was me when I believed that being the highest paid entertainer in New York would earn me respect. That was me before I realized that in America, talent is welcome as long as it doesn't come with conviction. That was me before I knew that signing for petitions and attending meetings, for believing that artists should have minds as well as hands, my name would appear in a little book that threatened to end my career. No trial, no evidence, just suspicion printed in ink. So I went to Washington voluntarily and stood up to tell the truth. I sat under those hot lights before the House Un-American Activities Committee and said, the blacklist is un-American.
Come on.
Do you know what happened after that? They told America that I was an enemy within, that thinking too freely was suspicious, dangerous. My television show was taken from me. No soldiers came. No doors were kicked in. I was simply erased, quietly, efficiently, like chalk wiped from a board. After the show was gone, they didn't archive it or preserve it. In fact, they took the kinescopes, the proof that a black woman once sat at a piano and spoke to a nation as an equal, and they threw them into the Hudson River. and let the current carry out of the American conscience. No announcement, no apology, just reels hitting water and silence filling the space where music had been. Erasure, not with fire, with acquiescence. But understand this, you do not throw something into a river unless you are afraid of what it might say.
Little, petty, vicious men indeed. There's been no shortage of these throughout history, as Hazel Scott reminds us. And when state authority demands private compliance, the little, petty, vicious men have too often acquiesced. So during the Red Scare, it was Hollywood that collaborated with HUAC and tightened the screws of censorship on storytellers who were dedicated to broadening the story of us. This is the same HUAC whose leadership included a former member of the Ku Klux Klan. So too today we see private actors capitulating to state power. So let's talk a little bit more about the parallels in the machinery of censorship then and now. Jacqueline, I'm going to come to you again. We know that the active complicity of studio heads was key to the success of the Red Scare. The committee itself couldn't say, don't hire those people. It was the studios that basically ruined careers. Now, I imagine some people would say, well, that was then. There was a studio system. Either you were in it or you weren't. Either you could work or you could not. So they would say, we don't have to worry about that power anymore to enforce this censorship. But what does that overlook about the contemporary dynamics of the industry now against ideologically driven censorship, which a lot of people woke up to, for example, with what happened to Jimmy Kimmel. Suddenly it was like, what? So what is it that is happening now with concentration of ownership that puts us in a very similar situation to what happened during the studio system?
Yeah, this thread is extremely important to look at because when you think about the Jimmy Kimmel situation, the video also referenced Joy Reid losing her show, but still, she's doing her thing.
Doing her thing.
In her own way. But this consolidation of the ownership of media outlets. I mean, it's a process that's been going on for a very long time, but right now, when we look at the percentage of companies, even more consolidation seems to be happening now, is happening now. Netflix is trying to acquire, Warner Media. So when you have that kind of concentration and shrinking of the powers that then have the ability to give us the information and the entertainment that we are accustomed to getting, it's a really scary and dangerous thing. And it means that there are so many fewer voices, agents, actors who would have the ability to push back against government influence or the fear that the government, our current government, is trying to instill in the leaders of media corporations. I mean, when you were talking about the complicity of the studios, there's also a really important link between the way that Hollywood said that it was policing itself through the Hays Code, the production code, starting in the 1930s, and then what picked up during these, this red baiting that took place in the 1940s and 50s. I mean, studios were claiming that they were going to adhere to certain standards of morality. They were equating the representation of criminality and sexuality, overt sexuality, with miscegenation, with any hints of interracial equality or mixing. These were kind of parallel fears, And they continue to be parallel fears in the ways that artists are being pressured not to tell stories that could be deemed so-called un-American. I think at the core of all of this is the ways that we're being gaslighted about what the term American even means. And there's this effort to try to redefine that when we have had artists and thinkers who are talking about democracy, and maybe that's the term that we should be focusing on rather than if something is American or anti-American.
Yeah, that Hays Code thing always cracks me up. Well, in my film course, I teach both versions of imitation of life, and of course, you know, especially 1950s version, after which you could not suggest or show the immorality of miscegenation. There's a scene where the mother of the passing child has to say, "Oh yes, her father was so light, but he was colored," right? So basically, in the story itself, it's not a story of miscegenation, but somewhere down the line there was some miscegenation that happened, so that he was unidentifiable as colored. But that was enough just to say it's not in the four corners of this particular story. So, you know, speaking of what has to be pushed outside of acceptable lines of story, we might move from the Hays Code to the Trump Code. And Ava, you told the story of the exonerated five. And there is a certain person who still is refusing to accept their innocence, has doubled down on his calling for them to be executed, and at the same time has generated a sense of improper ideology. And improper ideology is pretty much all the things that story is about. It is about racism in the criminal justice system. It's about injustice itself. It's about the long history of Black defendants being forced and being tortured and being prosecuted and being convicted by kangaroo courts. This is all the storyline that the person in the White House has labeled as improper and trying to erase. So as a storyteller, what are the implications of rendering stories like the Exonerated Five untellable if we are to take seriously the constraints that they're trying to put on us?
Right. Thank you for the question. So much of what we're dealing with right now is a distraction to the core work. And really around when they see us in the Exonerated Five, I found myself repeating something that I'd done on Selma, participating in the litigation of some word or thing they didn't like, which took away from the thing that I'd made and what I was trying to say. I felt forward on Selma, right? Well, we don't like the way you depicted LBJ. He was nice. Oh, okay, but this movie is about these people, Black people in Selma, and the whole campaign became about that. Like, I was going on Charlie Rose and shows to defend the film against the thing they didn't like. With the Exonerated Five, and when they see us, the first question, it's Trump. He said this. Okay, he said that. Let's move on to, let's talk about these boys and their mamas and what they did to survive and how these boys are duplicated thousands and millions of times across, since for the last 100 years, their story is a living, breathing story, right? But I found myself not talking about that as much because I'm talking about him and I'm talking about them, or and so this whole thing, you know, Toni Morrison had the wonderful line about, you know, distraction. You know, racism is a distraction. It is a function of their trying to turn our attention to something else. That's why I just don't even talk about the word woke. I don't accept the word. I'm not gonna fight you about it. I'm not gonna debate it with you. You can call me woke. You can call everything I make woke. It's not a bad thing. You may think it's a bad thing, but if I let the whole conversation be about this or those words, like that's a long list to litigate. That's gonna take all our time fighting them on these words when we need to be fighting what they don't want us to fight, which is you taking people out of their homes. You walking into homes now without a warrant. You arresting little kids. There's no equal protection under the law, due process, birthright citizenship, all of these things that have already been determined and we abide by in the 14th Amendment of the Constitution now are in question. Oh, they go back to the Supreme Court. What kind of Supreme Court? A loaded, slanted Supreme Court. And so we're litigating words. We're talking about these words and we're getting pulled down into conversations that take our eye off the ball. And that's what I found myself diminished in my own work and talking about my own work, because I'll sit down and they want to ask me about being Black or being a woman or being, oh my God, a Black woman filmmaker and talk about that. But I really want to talk to you about the thing I made. And so I just invite you to think about these conversations that we're having when you see a news report, when you're in a dinner conversation. I found myself so much distracted by the lies, the liars. And I was watching Noam the other day, and I just if I could take off my shoe and throw it at the screen, I was so angry. But that anger is distracting me from the thing I need to be doing and saying. And so we learn from history, and I thank you so much for drawing parallels to the past, because we know that we need to keep our eye on the ball. And studying King so intently, he was incredible in staying on the message, right? I mean, he would give you a little flurry and talk about this, but he would always come down to what he wanted to say. What's our intention? What's our democratic imagination? We can't spend the whole 4 years or whatever it is fighting these distractions that they're throwing out. We have to stay on message, stay focused, especially in our storytelling, especially in our filmmaking. We cannot obey in advance. We cannot censor ourselves because we think the studio's not going to want it, the critic's not going to want it. We've got to say the thing. And so I'm struggling with that. I'm asking people around me to hold me accountable. If you see me up here talking about somebody's woke or somebody's Black woman filmmaker, I've done it so much. I'm on record. I'm a Black woman, I'm a filmmaker. Please don't ask me how it is. Just go look at the movies, right? We have to make the movies, we have to make the things, we have to tell the stories. It's the only way. It's the only way.
So Viet, one of the strategies that's being used to try to constrain and limit the story of us is to problematize history, to erase memory, to frame it as divisive. So as a scholar who interrogates how memory has been weaponized, how does Hollywood's past give us any insight about how you anticipate it will handle the current demand for narrow, patriotic storytelling?
I'm not very optimistic. I think about the fact that Hollywood is a cinema industrial complex, and it works very easily with the military industrial complex. And it's basically America's unofficial ministry of propaganda. We don't need an official ministry of propaganda like a totalitarian society would, because I think the overwhelming majority of American filmmakers sort of agree with most of what the United States is doing. They may have some minor disagreements, or they want to pay attention to the victims, but they generally sort of agree. That's why we can have a movie industry that can do things like make Top Gun. I mean, Top Gun may be very entertaining. I haven't watched it, so I don't know what I'm talking about. But I mean, I'm sure it's very entertaining, but you couldn't make that movie without the American military-industrial complex. And so you have the whole span of things that Hollywood produces, from movies like Top Gun to that's a propagandistic movie, but 1968, Green Berets by John Wayne, set in Vietnam. That is an American piece of propaganda. It takes the basic Western movie genre, transports it to Vietnam, and makes the Vietnamese communists the Indians. And that template has been done over and over and over again to different populations, and I've fallen victim to it. I remember as a kid watching Exodus from the early 1960s, which is about the founding of the state of Israel, in which the Arabs and the Muslims are the Indians, and we identify with with Paul Newman, basically, as a very gorgeous Jewish man. And so the template of Hollywood, its ability to seduce us, to get us to see the world through American eyes, is not something that the government needs to compel. It's because the ideology of American exceptionalism and the inevitability of American capitalism and an American point of view is something that has been internalized by so many of us, even many of us who might be critical of that. So we have to be very sophisticated in understanding how the ideology of American filmmaking works. It's easy to look at the Green Berets or at Top Gun and say that's American propaganda, but there's a lot more subtle American endorsement of the American ideologies happening at the same time. So I'll give you an example. The Quiet American, a novel published in 1955 by Graham Greene, one of the most important 20th century novelists, basically predicts the devastation that's going to happen during the American war in Vietnam. And the Quiet American is a Yale-educated, very nice CIA agent in Vietnam who goes into Vietnam and kills a lot of people out of the best of intentions. So Hollywood adapts it in 1958, directed by Joseph Mankiewicz, starring Audie Murphy, the greatest American hero of World War II, as the Quiet American. And what does the movie do? By the end of the movie, the English journalist who criticizes the United States in the novel, at the end says, I was wrong. The United States was right. That was Hollywood's revenge on a novel that it saw as being anti-American. It would take until the early 2000s before the 2002 adaptation with Brendan Fraser, directed by Philip Noyce, would finally restore the actual ending of the movie. So Hollywood may get the story right. It just will do it at a time when it's safe to say so. The writer Omar El-Akkad has a great book called One Day Everyone Will Always Have Been Against This. He's talking specifically about the genocide in Gaza. People who are not willing to say anything now, 20 years from now, say, well, of course I was opposed to the genocide in Gaza. And they're going to start making movies about Palestinians that probably don't star Palestinians, but will star, I don't know who, but they will not feature Palestinians. So Hollywood can get the story right. It can only do so when enough time has elapsed so that it's safe enough for Hollywood to get that story right. And the reason why is because I think about the fact that Hollywood is the equivalent of a battleship. It costs a lot of money to make a movie. It takes a lot of effort to change the direction of the battleship. So we should not be looking at Hollywood to set an avant-garde ideal for us. During the Vietnam War, the first American artists to speak out were the poets. Why? Because no one cares about the poets. And I'm a writer, I live in LA. When I tell people in LA that I'm a writer, nobody cares. We're like the least important people. But because we're the least important people, we have the greater capacity to tell the truth when it matters, and then Hollywood will catch up to us.
Thank you, Nick. So we broaden our frame of censorship to go beyond state actors. We've looked at some of the forces, historical and now, that constrain artists. Some of these forces are private. Some of those are the logics of the markets and so forth. The danger, though, is that when certain thoughts are framed and rendered unthinkable, we begin to shrink back from voicing those ideas. Out of fear, we lower our voices, sometimes just a little bit. And before we know it, we have basically folded ourselves into the current moment. Now, this isn't new. Black artists, back-talking artists have seen this coming for a long time. And they've warned us about the price of apathy and appeasement. Artists like Lorraine Hansberry.
Where are our artists in the contemporary struggles? Some of them, of course, have made significant contributions to the Negro struggle, but the vast majority, where are they? Well, I'm afraid that they are primarily where the ruling powers have always wished the artist to be and to stay, in their studios. Part of this detachment is the result of the House Committee and McCarthyism in all its forms. The climate of fear, which we were once told would bear a bitter harvest in the culture of our civilization, has in fact come to pass. We were ceaselessly told, after all, to be silent, to be ignorant, to be without unsanctioned opinions, and above all else, obedient. This means in the arts, how can one write plays which have in them implicit or explicit a quality of the detestation of commerciality, if in fact one is beholden to the commerciality of the professional theater? How can one protest the criminal persecution of political dissenters if one has already discovered at 19 that to do so is to risk a profession? If all one's morality is wedded to the opportunist, the expedient in life, how can one have the deepest, most profound moral outrage about the condition of the Negro people in the United States? I know perfectly well that such institutions as the House Committee and all the other little committees have dragged on their particular obscene theatrics for all these years, not to expose communists, but merely to create an atmosphere where, in the first place, I should be afraid to come here tonight at all, and secondly, absolutely guarantee that I will not say what I am going to say, which is this: I think that my government is wrong. I will go further, speaking as a Negro in America, and impose a little of what Negroes say all the time to each other on what I am saying to you. And that is, it would be a great thing if they would send troops to finish the Reconstruction in Alabama, Georgia, Mississippi, and every place else where the fact that our federal flag flying creates the false notion that what happened at the end of the Civil War was the defeat of the slavocracy at the political as well as the military level. Finally, all of us who wish to exercise these rights that we are here defending tonight must really exercise them. Speaking to my fellow artists, I think that we must paint them, sing them, write about them. Otherwise, we are indulging in a luxurious complicity and no other thing.
So, Jacqueline, as our preeminent curator, we've seen the ways that the current administration is waging an all-out war on our collective memory. Notably, they've set their sights on the Blacksonian as an institution that must be purged. And I think we know why. When you encounter Emmett Till's open casket, when you witness the physical artifacts of enslavement and segregation, their exclusive and prejudiced view of history is forever shattered. So when we think about the implications of the text
stop.
on the
Enough. I hereby proclaim on behalf of President Trump, Executive Order 14253, restoring truth and sanity to American history. Over the past decade, Americans have witnessed a concerted and widespread effort to rewrite our nation's history, replacing objective facts with a distorted narrative driven by ideology rather than truth. Once widely respected as a symbol of American excellence and a global icon of cultural achievement, the Smithsonian Institution has, in recent years, come under the influence of a divisive, race-centered ideology. For example, the Smithsonian American Art Museum today features an exhibit that claims that race is not a biological reality, but a social construct, stating race is a human invention. Imagine. Museums in our nation's capital should be places where individuals go to learn, not to be subjected to ideological indoctrination or divisive narratives that distort our shared history. We will take action to ensure that all museums, public monuments, memorials, statues, markers, or other similar properties do not contain descriptions, depictions, or other content that inappropriately disparage Americans past or living, including persons living in colonial times, and instead focus on the greatness of the achievements and progress of the American people.
So, let's take a look about how this administration is going about focusing on the greatness and the achievements of the American people. By removing books like I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings and How Racism Takes Place from the Naval Academy Library, while allowing Adolf Hitler's Mein Kampf and Charles Murray's The Bell Curve to remain on the shelves. By demanding the Park Service remove an exhibit about George Washington's slave ownership just ahead of the 250 commemoration. There is an official story that's being forced down our throats, and our truth does not fit that story. So, as I was saying before I was so rudely interrupted, I want to connect these ideas, the attack on museums and on memory, and the attacks against inclusive, democratic storytellers. So how is it that when storytellers are banned from engaging in improper ideologies, our democracy is undermined? What is the relationship between the attack on storytelling and the disintegration of our democracy?
They are intimately connected. And I think we have to look at the way in which this attack on museums, I won't say the museum industrial complex.
But you could.
But
you could.
The attack on our cultural memory institutions, archives, libraries, museums, higher education, and progressive storytelling or truthful storytelling. I could just make it that broad. They're all connected. These are sources of genuine reflection. They are custodians of our heritage. And importantly, these are also spaces that do what's happening right now, which is to bring people together who have an interest in, well, they use learning. He uses learning, but what I think that's supposed to mean is like not questioning. Learning meaning that it's affirming what you already know. So I wanted to read something to you, which is that about 10 years ago, the International Council of Museums actually redefined what museums are in a way that I hope the gavel doesn't come out on, because this is what they came up with in 2019. Museums are democratizing, inclusive, and polyphonic spaces for critical dialogue about the pasts and the futures. Acknowledging and addressing the conflicts and challenges of the present, they hold artifacts and specimens in trust for society, safeguard diverse memories for future generations, and guarantee equal rights and equal access to heritage for all people. Museums are not for profit. They are participatory and transparent and work in active partnership with and for diverse communities to collect, preserve, research, interpret, exhibit, and enhance understandings of the world, aiming to contribute to human dignity and social justice, global equality, and planetary well-being. So this is a statement that was made from an international consortium of museum professionals. And it's really exciting to me to think about how this kind of language could be used for all the kinds of work that everybody in here does. What if we thought about filmmaking in this way? What if we thought about our scholarly work in this way? There is something about the collective and respectful approach to not just the past, but also the present, and for imagining what's possible in the future, that museums certainly are a major emblem of, and that's why they're being attacked in the ways that they are right now.
So thank you for that. We have diagnosed the problem. We have witnessed the problem over history. We have meditated with voices from our artists, our national treasures. But you know, as any diagnosis goes, the diagnosis doesn't get us where we need to be. We need to know what the intervention is going to be. So in this, our final sort of lightning round, I want to lift up the lessons from each of you that your careers, your work brings to us. So Ava, there's a lot of recognition about how if we stay within the lanes that we're in, our ability to tell the stories that we want to tell, and for you all to do what we want to see is going to be limited. You figured out a way to kind of escape that with the way you went about telling origin. So what is the lesson? What is the insight? What is the inspiration that creative storytellers, those who want to tell a story of us that doesn't run the conventional line as Origin did not? Tell us about your inspiration, how you did it, and what we can take from that example.
Yes, thank you. I think the main thing that we have to, we're here at Sundance. I really feel strongly that there's going to be a resurgence of independent cinema. I feel like that's the case because the Hollywood industrial complex is constricting, consolidating, and collapsing in on itself. And filmmakers won't stop making films. So where do they go? I hope that we see a more vibrant, more strongly attended Sundance. I remember being here in, I don't know, 2007, 8, 9, where you couldn't even walk. I mean, it's too many filmmakers, too many films. Filmmakers were coming who weren't even in the festival, and you were watching films on the side of walls, handing tapes, DVDs. I mean, it was just so many films, so much vibrancy around the cinematic voice. And I think, I know it's gonna come back because Hollywood is right now struggling to find its footing, struggling to be brave. And so instead of lamenting Hollywood, well, where do I tell my stories? How can I tell my stories? And that has historically been what Mr. Redford tried to promote here. You do not have to be a superstar like he is. You could still make your films and they still matter. And that's what this place was built on. And Hollywood took notice, and I won't say co-opted, but joined hands with it a bit. And I think in some instances, you know, the philosophy around it might have lost its way, but it was always there, and it's still there. And I believe it's going to come rushing back. What I did was learned from the people who came before me, whether it was Oscar Micheaux, whether it was Haile Gerima, whether it was Julie Dash, whether it was Charles Burnett. These were Black filmmakers who knew that there was no place for them in Hollywood. I mean, it wasn't even an option to be disregarded. They weren't they didn't even exist. None of their films were ever released by major studios except one. And so what did they do? They created new pathways to distribute their own work. Not just distribute their own work, exhibit their own work. Exhibit, that's the word we don't talk about. Create a space to show the thing. Right? You can do self-distribution, which I learned, but you have to get someone who'll say you can show it here, right? So these folks created, Haile Gerima, Ethiopian filmmaker, part of the LA Rebellion, bought a bookstore across from Howard University where he made, edited, and showed his films, right? He didn't need a studio to tell the stories that he wanted to tell and share them with the audiences that would come. And so I just feel like I am grateful that I always kept a foot in independent filmmaking and studio filmmaking, because if someone wants to give me $500,000 to make a film, I can. Does anyone want to give me $500,000? If I have to scrape together $10,000 to make a film, I can and I will. I'm never going to stop making them. And so when we allow these structures to silence us, we allow them by giving them permission to tell us what we can do, when we can do, what we can say, and how we can share it with an audience. This place, Sundance, was the place that said you don't necessarily have to do that. You can make it your way, you can show it here, you may find your way on a big theater screen, or it may just show here and have its own life. But these are the principles that I believe we will be forced to get back to. because the alternatives are diminishing. They're shrinking right in front of our eyes. And I say to young filmmakers or emerging filmmakers, new filmmakers, I wasn't young when I started, but newer filmmakers, don't be afraid of that. You know, fear is contagious, but courage is as well. And there are riches in the niches. You do not have to have, you know, $100 million films opening wide in AMC theaters. I get emotional. To have success, to tell your story, and to share it with another human being, for them to say, see what you meant and feel something, that is success, even more so. So I just invite people to remember that. These are tough times, but let's not be distracted. Let's stay focused on what we want to say, figure out our way to say it and how to share it with people. And the one last thing I'll say, if you're not a filmmaker, go see these films. Don't wait for the film that has the trailer on the place where you've got to seek out the voice. You know, seek out the voices, support them where they are. If you can give them some money on a Kickstarter or whatever, give it to them. If you can just go see the film, buy the ticket, encourage them. It's going to take all of us to keep it going.
Thank you, Ava. Thank you, Ava. Viet, I'm going to ask you to close this out. You've written that the writer's task is to find what is unspeakable and speak it. This is what your work, The Sympathizer, does in refusing easy narratives of American heroism in Hollywood. How can storytellers reject fear and tell the stories that the powers that be don't want us to share?
I want to mention 3 writers. Toni Morrison has already been mentioned. I think about Toni Morrison as a Black woman writer and editor in the 1970s, looking around and realizing that the center of American literature and American storytelling was somewhere over there, and she had a choice. She could move herself over there, or she could make the center of the United States move to her. That's what she chose to do. She chose to tell stories about Black people, Black history, Black women, and now we all live in Toni Morrison's universe because she didn't apologize and she did not translate. I don't come to a Toni Morrison novel thinking I'm going to have Black history explained to me. I think I have to do some studying and some thinking and some self-reflection in order to understand what her vision of the world is. So don't translate, don't apologize. These are 2 principles that I lived by when I wrote The Sympathizer, because as I said earlier, the condition of entry for so many model minority immigrants and refugees is that we have to apologize for our existence. And we have to explain where we came from. And we have to explain our customs and our languages and our cultures because we're foreigners and we're outsiders. The Sympathizer is written as a novel from one Vietnamese person to another Vietnamese person. There is no translation happening in that novel, which is why 13 out of 14 American publishers rejected the novel, and the 14th publisher who bought it was English. I was inspired by writers like John Berger and Mahmoud Darwish. John Berger, very powerful English writer, one of the things he wrote about was a visit to Palestine and an essay that he titled Undefeated Despair, to describe the conditions of Palestinians and what they were going through. And Mahmoud Darwish, the Palestinian writer, he is a national hero to Palestinians. Can you imagine writers being national heroes in the United States? Toni Morrison comes pretty close. But when Mahmoud Darwish died, he had a huge funeral because Palestinians recognized that poetry matters. Storytelling matters. This is how we live, and this is how we record our deaths and our struggles and our resistance. And I think the idea of undefeated despair is as optimistic as I can get. Because if we're realistic about our history and our present, we should be in despair. But we have to be undefeated. Because it's been the legacies of previous generations of activists and writers and artists and storytellers who have been undefeated in their despair that leaves us with this present moment. We would not have Sundance and Black storytellers and Black filmmaking without the undefeated despair of previous generations. And as a writer, I have to say, undefeated despair describes the conditions of writers. I have never met a writer who's not, or an artist who has not gone through conditions of despair. And if you are a writer or an artist or a filmmaker who has never felt despair, I hate you. The rest of us have to fortify ourselves in the coalition and in the solidarity of our ancestors and our compatriots and our fellow artists and writers who have never given in and who believe in undefeated despair.
Undefeated despair. Well, speaking of undefeated despair, we began this evening with an artistic reading of Paul Robeson's courageous testimony before the House Un-American Activities Committee. Let's move toward the end of our evening, first with words written by Justin Emeka, and then words by the great Toni Morrison, our most lauded and most frequently banned literary figure.
Where are the stories of our lives? Where's the story of us? Every crackdown starts the same way.
Someone decides a story is too dangerous to tell.
Not because it's false, but because it's too clear.
They may not throw your film in the river.
They may just never fund it, never screen it.
Hope you forget how to dream it.
Forget how to believe in it.
Authoritarians fear
us. Because we conjure a revolution of the imagination.
Authoritarians fear us because our story says this happened.
Even when they insist it didn't. Our story says look again.
Even when they tell you to look away.
We live as long as we are remembered.
Our stories outlive permission. I know the world is bruised and bleeding, and though it is important not to ignore its pain, it is also critical to refuse to succumb to its malevolence. Like failure, chaos contains information that can lead to knowledge, even wisdom, like art.
This is precisely the times when artists go to work. There's no time for despair, no place for self-pity. No need for silence, no room for fear. We speak.
We write.
We do language.
That is how civilizations heal.
Authoritarians fear storytellers because they can dream of worlds that exist beyond their footprint, where the gavel, that gavel in all of its forms, has been obliterated. We are about eliminating that gavel, and we all have a role to play in doing that, in ensuring that the backtalkers who were blacklisted are not forgotten, in recognizing that the act of remembering is not only an act of recovery, but an act of resistance. And in inviting you to do this, we invite you to look at all the portraits around the room of backtalkers from the past who we are recovering for guidance in this moment, in this future. You can visit some of the stations where we're asking you to add your voice and to take a stand as a certified backtalker. So if you want to embody your inherent internal backtalker, there are many opportunities around this room to do so. Browse the space, check out the 2026 Liberation Calendar for activities every day in February, because the fight for memory, for a fuller story of us, is a daily practice. So now, my thank yous. I am so grateful to my fellow panelists, Viet Thanh Nguyen, Jacqueline Stewart, and Ava DuVernay. This room has been touched by your wisdom, your grace, and your steadfast vision that we will carry throughout the rest of this festival and beyond. Of course, I want to thank my posse at AAPF who makes events like this possible, the entire team. And also our partners at Sundance who have been willing co-conspirators for the last 6 years of the story of us. And finally, I want to thank our incredible, amazing performers, Kara Young, Jon Michael Hill, and Justin Emeka. Who co-created the artivism components with us. Justin, this program could not be what it is without the power of your artistic vision. So I'm passing this broke down gavel to you for our conclusion.
Yes, yes, yes. I want to thank everybody so much for coming out. I don't take these moments for granted, and I encourage us all not to take these moments for granted, of being in a room together, of laughing together, of thinking together, crying together, right? These moments are so precious. And I want to thank AAPF for calling and inviting us to lend our artistry. We as artists, see one of our greatest functions is in the tradition of griots, whose function was to tell the stories of the people so they never forget who they are, particularly in times when they are in danger of forgetting who they are. And unfortunately, we are living in a time where we are in danger of forgetting who we are. And so the capital that we spend as artists of trying to recall the stories and tell the stories of who we are, we cannot take for granted these moments. And for you all to invest your gaze, everybody comes to Sundance and wants to be seen, right? And we have the power of sight just within our eyes. And I hope we exercise it to really see each other, right? And instead of just trying to become somebody, just really take each other in and see each other. And that's really the work that AAPF is doing, right? When institutions are closing down, artistic institutions are closing down. So that's why whenever Dr. Kimberlé calls me, I come, right? And it was not a question for the three of us. Whatever she says we need, we come and we lend our talents, right? And so I really want to thank her and encourage you all, if you can, make a small donation to this work, to AAPF. There is a QR code right here. You can also go to aapf.org, because to help really inspire and cultivate the next generation of backtalkers, right? And I would be remiss if I do not take this opportunity to really acknowledge our titan, our hero, our intellectual giant on the stage, Dr. Kimberlé Crenshaw. Right. Whose has an incredible new work coming out. You may not have wanted me to tell you this, but she has a new wonderful book coming out called Backtalker, an American Memoir, and it's available for pre-order. That will be coming out May 5th. So please, reach out and support our giant, support our heroes, support the heroes in each other, right? And now finally, I want to invite Amanda Kelso, who is the acting CEO of the Sundance Institute, and give her a special thanks for really hosting this unique program since 2021. Can we all welcome Amanda? Thank you so much.
Thank you. I know that I'm between you and the rest of your evening, and especially the amazing desserts that are at the back, so I will be very brief. I just wanted to say this is the type of moment that our visionary founder, Robert Redford, would want to have uphold. So thank you so much, and let's give another round of applause for everyone who was part of this evening. And I also want to close by thanking just a few folks, because it was really a collaborative effort tonight to make this event happen. I want to say thank you to Just Films program at Ford Foundation. Woo! And also to the Foundation of Systemic Change, and also very much to the Bertha Foundation, as well as all of the staff of the Sundance Institute, as well as our volunteers. So thanks for everything. Have a great evening, and good night.
Wow, wow, wow. What a magical performance. What an honor to watch it again as well. I was there in the room in Park City, and it's just it's amazing to be able to watch it again. And I hope everyone who watched it for the first time enjoyed it as much as I did. My name is Kevin Minofu. I am the Senior Research Fellow here at the African American Policy Forum, and I'm delighted to be hosting tonight's talkback. Just a reminder again for folks who have been asking about whether the chat will be saved and whether you'll get the links to that. We will be sharing a summary after the conclusion of the event, so we'll get all the relevant links and the resources that we dropped. And we have an exciting new resource that we're looking forward to announcing at this talkback as well. At this year's Sundance, we revisited a period when artists were hauled before Congress and told to justify their beliefs, their friendships, even their right to belong in public life. It is impossible to ignore how familiar the language of suspicion feels right now. At the same time we're seeing the architecture of surveillance grow, we're also seeing the lowering of the standards of public discourse. In the past week alone, we have watched the President of the United States tweet a video that dehumanized not only another former president and first lady, but used an ancient slur that literally dehumanizes all Black people too. At APF, we are of the belief that one of the principal goals of artivism, which is the process of melding creativity with advocacy, is the life-giving act of humanizing our experiences, our history, and our ancestors. It is that essential act of humanization that only storytellers can conjure, that authoritarians both past and present fear so deeply. What you just witnessed is the result of months of research, collaboration, rehearsal, and trust. It takes real commitment to step back into moments when artists were publicly stripped of dignity and to restore their full humanity on stage. And we're having this conversation at a time when state power is once again being used to narrow who counts, whose identity is recognized, and which histories are treated as legitimate. And that makes this work urgent more than ever. If this broadcast moved you or clarified what is at stake, we invite you to support AAPF. Programs like this depend on sustained backing from people who believe that culture and democracy are inseparable. So you can make a contribution right now. We're going to be dropping links in the chat, and we have a QR code which is up on the screen as well. So if you're moved by tonight's presentation, then please feel free to support us as well. Your support helps continue creating spaces where art, storytelling, and advocacy come together. We're also asking you to take a few minutes before you leave to complete our post-event survey. It's really important that as we continue to build up these programs, that we hear about your experiences watching them and being part of them. Your reflections on what resonated, what you learned, and what you want to see next help shape what we build. As a thank you, the survey includes a discount code for merch if you sign up an associated event. And if you're interested, I'm wearing the merch right now. It's the official certified backtalker merch. And you can also purchase the merch if you're interested by going to the AAPF website, where we'll be selling our merch, which includes the backtalker shirt that I'm wearing, as well as our Story of Us beanie, which for all of you in the middle of winter right now is very, very crucial. So the panel and performance is an exhibit of why the essential work of backtalking to power, authority, and justice is so vital, and why artists have been some of our most prominent practitioners. So in this talkback, I'm delighted to begin the conversation with our artists and our creators who stepped into the long legacy of artistic backtalkers to not only humanize the lives of Paul Robeson, Hazel Scott, Toni Morrison, and Lorraine Hansberry, but all those who have been silenced before them. Before I turn to our artists, I would like to turn to the person who helped shape the program and was my co-conspirator in conceiving and shaping the evening. So delighted that Kimberlé Crenshaw is here tonight for our talkback. Kim, when we think through the program and watching it back, so we have convened these artistic events at Sundance for the last 3 years now, and we've taken different modes and modalities of depicting what we think is important for this year. And so this year I was struck, and I was also struck by your insistence that we started with the opening with the gavel. That's how you wanted to start the program, with the gavel. And you wanted to bring in the voices not only of those who had been purged during McCarthyism, but also the words which have been taken out from what we could use, and also the executive orders that were stripping our ability to actually do the work. This year, and the context of 2026, what is the through line you wanted people to leave? And together, of course, with the panel performances that punctuated the artivism. But what was the through line you wanted people to leave with?
Well, so first of all, Kevin, thank you so much for hosting, and I also was deeply moved just watching this again. The power of the artistry and the way it amplified the conversation. It was such a beautiful mix. I was really happy to be part of this. Uh, my my initial inspiration was that we wanted people to feel that they were suddenly being called to witness and to be part of the hearings, the suppression that was the Red Scare. I wanted people to experience it in the way that we thought perhaps people were experiencing it at the time, like they didn't know what was happening, and all of a sudden there is this committee, there is this interrogation, there is this Red Scare. And so we didn't allow people to just settle into it. It started with the gavel. We wanted that gavel to represent the suppression, the silencing, the disorder that was created through the imposition of an illegitimate order. That gavel we wanted to become talismanic. We wanted it to be that thing that at the end we want to destroy. So it needed to be the first thing that people encountered. And hopefully at the end, it is the thing that we can all commit ourselves to no longer being held by, no longer being called to order by. There is the ability to put all the things that we don't want to happen anymore into that symbol and then destroy it. So that was basically, the vision to draw attention and to have it introduce each moment when we were lifting up something that was historical and we understand the destruction, and then the contemporary echo of that thing. So yeah, the gavel was the first thing that we heard before Paul Robeson got called into this space with the effort to try to destroy his legacy. The gavel is when we hear all of these words that this current regime doesn't want us to use anymore. The gavel is the thing we hear when we hear of someone who had the attention and the fame of Hazel Scott, and then her career is destroyed and her memory is almost erased. That gavel is telling us that we need to pay attention and resist. And it just works so beautifully. I'm just so happy to have been a part of it.
Thank you so much. And I remember in our we described this as the triple toe loop of trying not only to, and as someone who grew up in the Southern Hemisphere, I had to learn a few ice skating terminology to get that one. But it was the idea of not only bringing the artistic performance and what the history meant to this moment, but also giving people a sense of we are living through history right now, and we are experiencing what people are experienced, and we are faced with a choice. So yeah, thank you for sharing that and what the gavel was meant to be. Justin, I'm excited to welcome you to our talk back. I'm a little bit worried that you might gavel me out, so I'm just hoping that I'm in the clear for the next few minutes. As a co-creator, and you've been with us, I think, for two Sundance productions, I was struck by, you so presciently reminded us at the end that we're losing access to our history and we risk forgetting who we are. The event taught us about artists like Robeson, Scott, and Hansberry were targeted not only at a professional level, but on a deeply personal level. And it stripped them of the legitimacy, first and foremost. As an artist, and you also had the interesting job of not only being a director and being an actor, but also a creator. You had to work with some of these pieces. We rewrote some of these pieces. We, created, what would Hazel Scott have said after the conclusion, for example. I'm just interested from just your perspective as an artist. What is it like to place the full humanity of these artists back on stage and on this platform?
Well, thank you, Kevin. One is just an honor to be a part of, to be in community with these people. The process, we came together really and put this together in just a few days. We all just kind of jam-packed into a house for 2 days and spent, kind of round the clock figuring out how this might work, and just really wonderful to see how it's come together. I mean, as I wrote in the final piece, I often return to the idea, that we live as long as we are remembered. For me, memory is a form of breath, and so when we as artists can help audiences remember someone fully, not as a slogan, not as a caricature, but as a human being, we can actually extend their life. So placing Robeson and Hazel Scott, Hansberry back on stage is not nostalgia to me. It's like resurrection. It's a spiritual moment. It's a refusal to let distortion be the final word. And here's the deeper part for me. When the state targeted them, it tried to shrink them into symbols, either villains or saints, and both are flattening, right? Both erase the human. We wanted to restore was a little of their interior life, which is a big responsibility. We wanted to show their fatigue, their private fears, their longing to simply work, their humor, their love, their doubt, because inside our epic heroes are very ordinary concerns, and that matters. Because if we only remember them as giants, then we excuse ourselves from that responsibility. We say, well, I could never be that brave. But if we remember, as we navigate our rents and reputations and mortgages and relationships and children's and whatever, we still have a responsibility to make principled choices that make something shift in our communities around us right now. Then we realize that within our ordinary lives, live life in our imagination. And it's the artist's responsibility to allow us to remember our heroes fully, so we can extend their lives. And we don't just extend their lives, we awaken something in our own. Because if memory keeps them alive, then imagination makes courage transferable, right? And that's the real responsibility, not just to honor their legacy, but to recognize that heroism is our inheritance. It's our decision to make and choose and embrace every day in our own lives.
Oh, wow, thank you. That's the writer in you again. And I think what you're sharing is just, Ava left with the words of, fear is contagious. And I think what you are telling us again is that humanizing these figures is an act of like radical possibility, because one of the principal acts of a fascist authoritarian regime is to dehumanize people, is to no longer make them human. And so the work that we were trying to do and that you did with these pieces was to give context to their lives, and not just as sinners or saints as you describe them, but full people that we could also become. So thank you very much for that. And so I'm excited to welcome Jon to speaking about the heroes that we had to humanize. Jon, you embodied Paul Robeson, a figure whose brilliance was undeniable and whose career was systematically dismantled because he would not retreat from his convictions. When you were carrying Paul Robeson's word in your body, you were basically accusing this body that was saying that he was un-American, and you were throwing it back at them. What did you come to understand about the scale of what was taken from him, and the clarity by which he chose not to retreat in that moment?
Yeah, thanks for that. Paul Robeson was someone I looked into in college that, he's sort of been stripped to a certain extent from the record books. This is something that they were actively trying to do. So my first encounter with him was just writing a paper about him and Ira Aldrich, and being inspired by what he was able to achieve. This is a man who, I think he was like a third person admitted to Rutgers. His studies were impeccable. Listening to him speak, it's as if he's writing extemporaneously. That's how powerful his intellect was, and that's something he cultivated and raised himself to global acclaim. And yet they were able to silence him for a period of time. And I think it brings me back to this, in trying to embody someone who's made that sort of sacrifice, you need but use your imagination. So as an artist, I always start with that and what it would be like to be in his position. Our instruments are very different. He's got the most incredible booming baritone voice, and I would never be able to imitate that. So falling short of imitation, you just sort of try to get at their integrity. What is that thing that they are wrestling with in this moment in time, and see if you can channel that. And with everything going on, unfortunately, it's not hard to imagine and place yourself in those shoes, and you just sort of want to embody that and bring that to the people. He was an inspiring figure. I think, you know, these people were targeted because they were at the absolute top of their field. Hazel, Scott, and that those people were inspiring a generation of other artists coming up, and they wanted. That's why they want to take those voices away. So it's really about what you're sacrificing when you stand up for what's right, and it inspires us all to think about, well, what would I sacrifice? It's about what you do when things are hard. That's where the integrity and the credibility comes from. It's about, are you willing to speak when things are difficult? And he absolutely was, and it's an honor to even get to embody that artistically. And I just always appreciate Professor Crenshaw for inviting me to engage in this kind of work, because a lot of times, as Justin was sort of saying, as artists, you take a lot of work because you need work. You don't always get to choose what you're working on. So to get to say yes to a project like this that is so prescient and so immediate, it's really a gift and a huge responsibility.
Thank you. And it's one that you carried very impeccably. And I think hearing you speak about connecting with the integrity is just a reminder about how much of an empathetic act being an artist and an actor in particular is. It's like you have to have a lot of empathy to pick up what these emotions and what the experiences must have felt like.
Someone's asking in the chat real quick, was this my first time hearing about Hazel Scott? And I actually was thinking about this because it was not. I've only seen the video of her playing pianos at the same time, but working on this gives us an opportunity to revisit those lives and look at what's going on. So I had heard of her before, but now I get to really do the research and understand her impact on the society, the culture, and what was really taken away. This is a person with the first Black person with a television show. This is a icon, a monumental person in the movement. So yeah, engaging with work like this is an invitation to continue to research our history and grow ourselves and become more informed. That was something that all of these artists were. They were incredibly informed and they had the answers to the tests, and that gives you confidence, and that's why they were able to speak up the way they were.
Yeah, and I think that's what Kim said. Imagine Beyonce being forgotten in 50 years. That's what they did to Hazel Scott. So I'm glad that we were able to do that for her and her legacy. And so now I want to speak a little bit about the fact that not only was it people like Hazel Scott and Paul Robeson, but there was an entire history, there's an entire trajectory of art and culture and the movement which was interrupted by McCarthyism. So we want to encourage you to learn more about the history and the backtalkers that shaped it by clicking on the link in the chat and what's up on our screen to access our Story of Us Director's Cut, 2026 Director's Cut. And so if you grew up with DVDs, I was a big DVD generation, is that the best part of a DVD when you got a DVD was you always got the Director's Cut, which had all the bloopers, the fuller things which the studio had cut, and all of the resources and links and great bits that you wanted. And so that's what we like to think about our Director's Cut. And it's a multimodal guide that takes you deeper, drawing the urgent connections between the censorship of the McCarthy era then and the authoritarianism we're living through now. Inside, you'll learn more about the repercussions for all of us from banned words and the attacks on the Smithsonian. Discover how the surveillance tactics were beta tested on Paul Robeson were later weaponized against MLK. How the strategy of appeasement failed Lorraine Hansberry's generation, just as it fails ours. And how Roy Cohn passed his playbook from McCarthy directly to Donald Trump. It features archival wisdom from Lorraine Hansberry, Paul Robeson, Hazel Scott, and Toni Morrison, alongside extended insights from tonight's panelists as well. You can also watch the incredible performances. It's amazing. It's both something you can read and watch and experience the gallery of backtalker portraits from our space at Sundance and add your name to the ranks of those talking back to anti-Black censorship. I'll also name that tomorrow, if you subscribe now to Intersectionality Matters, our podcast hosted by Professor Kimberlé Crenshaw, you will hear a version of today's presentation that opens the new reflection on the importance of artivism. And that episode is dropping tomorrow. So if you want to hear back and you want to share that with other people as well, the podcast episode will be dropping tomorrow. So multiple resources that have been generated from this event. So let me turn back to the talk back. Justin, I'm interested in just maybe thinking of you and your director, putting your director hat on. What was your thought about keeping the performance in the room dynamic? We could see in the space the idea that we wanted some interruptions. We wanted the actors moving through the space. We wanted sometimes you in a particular space, sometimes the person you're interacting with, whether it was Cara or John, at a different space. Can you give us some insight about what are your thoughts about how you wanted the audience to engage with the performances and what it meant to move in the space and in the room?
Yeah, well, I mean, nowadays, more and more, it's just such a privilege slash blessing to be in a room of people, in community, because we're losing that like every day, like our ability to just kind of feel each other's energy in a room. And I am kind of like an infinite believer in that humanity that we experience when we take the time, when we invest the time to be in a room together, and really experience what each other's saying, be able to look each other in the eye, rub shoulders, get mad, cry, all of that. And so at one level, just wanted to kind of take advantage of that. And so, having Cara move through the room so that the audience can just kind of get excited and just feel, not just hear her voice, but actually like feel the reach of her energy. We were among the people. And this is just such a creative way of engaging an audience, Dr. Crenshaw is, in terms of like having this panel and having art that is in conversation while the audience is in conversation with both of those. So just being very sensitive to the journey that we're crafting. And we were crafting it up to like, 10 minutes before the show, So we were also like very sensitive to just the energies that we want to take the audience on. And it's a little scary, but in an exciting way, in terms of like the ability to change and turn on a dime is exciting, scary, but it's why we do the art, so it's wonderful to be a part of.
Amazing. Thanks, Justin. Thanks for sharing that. I'm interested here, Kim, just your thoughts about artivism has been something which has been integral and central to AAPF's mission. And artivism and the role of arts with the movement it's been maybe a contentious relationship. So sometimes they've been at the forefront of movements. Sometimes movements have thought that this is not valuable and we need boots on the ground, really. Mm-hmm. But why has artivism been something that you have always thought that AAPF needs that is at the center of AAPF's work?
Yeah. Well, you know what, I like to I like to replay that. I'm not an artist, but I like to play one when I'm with other artists. I actually trace my own desire to integrate art into social justice advocacy to my own parents. This is something that I write about in the memoir. My parents came together through music. And for them, music was the vehicle in the 60s for promoting ideas about social justice, promoting ideas about what a truly inclusive democracy really was. So I saw them put together programs and really think carefully about the emotional ride that they wanted their audiences to go on, how they wanted to use different elements of performance to bring people into a conversation. They wanted people to engage both the left brain and the right brain, the thinking and the feeling. And that has been critical to what we've done in the African American Policy Forum, from the work that we did with Say Her Name, the play that we developed to bring people into both awareness about the loss of the lost, but also the community and the joy and the spiritual dimensions of fighting together and lifting each other up. So it's been sort of our go-to as we move into new areas of trying to engage and trying to make the engagement something that people are deeply immersed in. It's not just something that they remember, but something that they actually feel, something that gets inside of their bodies and their spirit, because that's what we're going to need in order to fight back. And I have to say, on this festival, number one, it was the last Sundance that we had, on the mountain. So it was a very special, moment for those of us who are part of the Sundance community. It was the first festival that we did after the passing of our founder, Robert Redford. And it was also the festival that happened when it was absolutely clear that the fight for independence and storytelling is going to have to take on the ways in which this current, regime is desperate to erase any semblance of a full story of us. So it was meaningful in so many ways. But then the last thing is, the first film that I went to, if I ever had any doubts about the importance of artivism, they were put to rest. I went to a documentary called The Legend of Luis Valdez. And for those of you who don't know, he is the director behind La Bamba. He's the director behind Zoot Suits. But what I did not know is that he got his start doing theater for the United Farm Workers. And part of their mobilization against the grape growers who were exploiting them was to use theater to express aspirations, to create the critique of the growers, to galvanize people in the direction of the advocacy for their well-being. And it was a beautiful thing, and it lasted under the auspices of the farm workers until, as Luis Valdez says, Cesar Chavez said, you know what, we need to focus on organizers. We don't have the ability and the space and the luxury for art. And that was a moment that Luis Valdez broke off and said, no, we cannot sacrifice the art. And so his entire career begins with, being part of a movement, but also recognizing the special role that art plays in being able to sustain these movements. And so that's how, we come to experience him, know him. And so for me, it was exactly what I needed to experience to, continue this work. So I was blessed this year to have these amazing artists and to have AAPF realize the vision. This was one for the ages.
Thank you, Kim, for that. And we cannot sacrifice the art. And so maybe to close the segment out, and I hear we're delighted to be joined by Kara Young, who portrayed Hazel Stott, and also Lorraine Hansberry, and Toni Morrison too. So Kara, I'm interested, just hearing a little bit from what Kim said about we cannot sacrifice the art, and you've now worked with us on a number of artistic engagements, being an artivist. You got a moment to play backtalkers here, like Black women who talk back to power, who said, no, I won't be silenced. Given the climate against artists now, that artists are under attack, why should artivism be an important aspect of our broader, movement, our broader fight for our democracy?
Yeah, wow. Big question. I have to say, I've been honored every single time I have been asked to join any event that is, to me, like revolutionary in how it's done the community that is bringing together, and the message that is moving forward. I mean, the story of us was incredibly special, activating the spirits of Hazel Scott and Lorraine Hansberry and Toni Morrison, their testimonies at not Toni Morrison, but Lorraine Hansberry and Hazel Scott. I mean, the story of Hazel Scott touched me to the core. And if anyone knows Lorraine Hansberry's epic Raisin in the Sun, being the first Black woman to have been produced on Broadway, first Black playwright to be produced on Broadway. A Raisin in the Sun is artivism. You know, it's bringing a huge issue forward. And I think that now, more than ever, I mean, in this time that we are all alive right now, the truth matters. And all of the systems that are in place, that they are pushing a narrative of not the truth. And to me, artivism, when the artist writes, when the painter paints, when the poet speaks, when the singer sings a song, you know, I mean, obviously what music are we listening to, right? But when the artist arts, it is in response to the world. And in that response to the world is activism in that sense. And so when you're doing, well, you know, I've been in some really, I just can't even believe it, the kind of work or the kind of opportunities that I step into, it feels like a revolutionary act for people to sit in an audience and listen to Black people. You know, it feels like, no, you're listening. You will listen for an hour and a half. You will listen to what this spirit has to say. Yeah, I don't know if I answered the question completely, but it is, I just hope people support us financially so that we can do the work to change the world. You know, because I feel like in that, at Sundance, all of these young filmmakers were there. People who attend Sundance every year was there. But the amount of people from all over the world are sitting in this small space. I'm not sure what the count was, but they had never, you know, I was not privy to Hazel Scott's story until I read her testimonies, but also, you know, talking to Justin and Jon Michael Hill about her story. It like shook me that her truth and the reality of who she is, the power of who she is, and who she is, I'll say, not was completely stripped from her. Mm-hmm. Because she was the truth. Mm-hmm. And so that's what they're trying to do. Mm-hmm. And that's what we have to be in constant resistance of.
And that's what you are doing. And so thank you so much for that, and for reminding us about that and what it means to be an artist and respond to the world and tell us about the world. So I just want to big shout out to Kim for joining us, to Justin, John, and Kara. Justin, John, and Kara, can you quickly give us any shout outs about what you might be doing, how people can support you, what new projects people can check you out on?
First, Kara.
Okay. I am going to be in a movie called Is God Is by Alicia Harris. It's an adaptation of a play that she wrote that got produced in 2018 at Soho Rep, and she adapted it into a screenplay. And so that's what's coming out on Mother's Day. And the Whoopi Monologues is this summer at Lincoln Center.
John?
So I did this limited series on Apple that comes out May 20th. It's called Maximum Pleasure Guaranteed. It should be a fun comedy thriller. But what I'm really excited about is Terrell Alvin McCraney, artistic director over at the Geffen, ensemble member at Steppenwolf, Oscar-winning writer. It wrote a new play called Windfall, and it has to do with an activist who goes missing and the city of Chicago coming to offer a settlement. Is a thing that cities do now, and he's tackling activism and capitalism and all these big ideas in a very human story. So I'm very excited to delve into that with them back at Steppenwolf next month.
Amazing. I know that's directed by our friend Away Tempo as well.
Hey.
So really, really excited for that. And Justin, closer, what are you up to?
Yes, I'm as a director, I'm very interested in decolonizing the imagination of classic theater, you know. So I'm also often revisiting Shakespeare. Right now, I'm working on an adaptation that I wrote of A Doll's House, of Heinrich Ibsen's A Doll's House, putting Black culture into the world, inviting Black culture into the world at Two Rivers Theater in New Jersey. I have an incredible cast. Cara Ricketts is playing Nora, Russell G. Jones, Dr. Rank, Joshua Chebri. Just a wonderful cast that I'm working with that I'm very excited about.
Great, thank you for making your time, giving your time to us this evening and at the event. And yeah, we'll be dropping links to those things in the document we drop at the end. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. So sorry about my tardiness.
No, thank you, Cara. Thank you. And so before we close out, I'm really excited to bring someone who was actually in the room, was an audience member in the room, to share a little bit about her experience being part of this. I'm delighted to welcome Cristina Escobar, who's an entertainment journalist and senior director of marketing and communications at Free Press. She writes at the intersection of media, race, and institutional power, and recently published a reflection of this event. So, Cristina, thank you for being with us. I know you've attended Sundance many times, in kind of different roles as well. Can you tell us a little bit? I know, and in the piece that you wrote for the Free Press, you specifically speaking a little bit about what both John and Cara have spoken about in terms of Hazel Scott. You wrote about Hazel Scott, and you talked about how McCarthyism didn't just blacklist her, and it erased her. So can you tell us a little bit about what stood out for you about attending this event and what's memorable?
Yeah, so I've been to Sundance more than a handful of times now. I was able to go the first time thanks to the Sundance Press Inclusion Initiative, which brings in critics from all over and with different backgrounds. And I think that that is really important because while we do work on who the storytellers are, who's in front of the camera and who's behind the camera, we also need to do work on who the cultural gatekeepers are. And that's what my work has been leading into, having joined Free Press, which is not Barry Weiss's Free Press, for those who don't know us. So I have worked as a critic and an entertainment journalist. I run a publication called Latina Media Co. that specifically platforms Latina and queer critics to help address that piece. And that's what I was doing at Sundance, what I've done historically. But this year I also got to go with Free Press and to do this work around freedom of speech issues around and how they affect racial justice. And so, of course, when I saw this event, it was the very top of my list. I was so excited to be there. And it was such a beautiful room. The crowd was the plural, creative, joyful, multiracial group of like-minded folks that the racists in power hate so much. Like, it was there at Sundance. You know, I think it's not here that often. I think we maybe saw it at Bad Bunny's halftime show, but it was 100% there. And to be there in person, the excitement and the power of the presentation and the mixed media that I know you all experienced was just emotionally impactful, as Dr. Crenshaw mentioned as well, making us both think and feel. And I mentioned Hazel Scott in my piece because I had not heard of her before. And I feel like, as someone who's paid some attention to media, but is not a Black person, that I wish I had heard of her. I felt like her story was so powerful, partly because I think there's this narrative that Black people and people of color should be grateful for just being included, that we're new somehow to these spaces, and that that's so much of the dominant narrative. But when you actually go back and look at the record, and when people like AAPF go back and look at the record, that is not the case. They are lying to us. And when we absorb that and take that in and start to act from that place of insecurity, we don't get to do all of the amazing things, and we don't get to stand in her power. And I just felt that her story really speaks to power, who has it, how it works, and how to get it back when it's taken from you. You know, like, you all are doing this work of lifting up her story and getting it out to more people. And it made me think about one story of erasure that I did know, which is that Allison Walker, who wrote The Color Purple, brought us, many of us, Zora Neale Hurston. And now her books are read all over the country in high school English classes, and people of all races and ethnicities in the United States know who she is and know of her contributions. And so much as this can be a starting point to learn more about media, and who was there at the forefront, what their contributions were, and what it meant. Like, I just think that's so important and powerful work.
Thank you, Christina, and thank you for tying that all together, particularly how the emotion moved to the history and, you know, your relationship to the work as well. As a closing question, I know the Free Press is particularly interested in just speaking back to the way the media complicity to the regime. We wrote a statement recently where we spoke about how the racist video that the president posted was partly a consequence of the way the media has kind of allowed that to happen. And so I think our work is very aligned in calling this out. But as someone who attended and also is working in this space, in this sector, can you tell us a little bit about how your attendance at this event is helpful for you in doing your work and the work that Free Press does as well?
Absolutely. Well, as I mentioned, it was a joy to be with you all in community and to experience your leadership and to learn from it. For me, and what I took back to Free Press, and I think what you see in the piece I wrote for our community, is that there are some really important learnings here. There's that learning that I was speaking to about not taking the dominant narrative at face value, of reaching out to folks like AAPF, like others who are doing the work and pulling stuff up, pulling out different pieces. There's work about resisting censorship in community, that being able to do that together and to be able to recognize the attacks that we're experiencing now. We recently published a report at Free Press called Chokehold, outlining Donald Trump's and his administration and his cronies, what they did for the first year in terms of attacks on free speech. And it can be easy to move on from one to the next one, but when you look at them all together, the power of them is so clear, and the concerted attack is so clear. And our researcher Nora Benavides really laid that out. And I feel like understanding what we are up against and how to resist it meaningfully and together was so powerful. And part of it, a huge part of it, is clearly thinking about the importance of story and how we can use it to nurture ourselves and our communities and to build it into our work. And you all did that so beautifully. I learned so much, and I'm so grateful.
Thank you, Christina, and thank you to Free Press for really modeling what partnership is like, and we're looking forward to partnering and working on many things to come. So again, a big thank you to Christina, a big thank you to Kara, Kim, John, and Justin for joining me in tonight's invigorating post-event conversation. As we have learned, work like this does not end when the cameras turn off. It shapes how journalists frame their stories, how organizers articulate their demands, and how audience understand what they're witnessing in real time. This kind of work requires sustained infrastructure. So again, if you're interested in supporting AAPF, the link is up there. There's a link for you to donate. Please sign up, join our mailing list if you're not already on it, and support it, and keep on the lookout for the events that are still to come. Again, check out our merch. I just see Tabitha just bought a shirt, which is amazing. I'm excited to see you wearing it. Our certified back talker t-shirts and other Sundance 2026 merch is available. You will get a discount if you complete the survey. But yeah, go ahead and buy it. And speaking of backtalking, as Justin mentioned, be on the lookout for our very own Kimberlé Crenshaw's latest memoir, Backtalker, an American Memoir, which comes out May 5th and is available to pre-order to learn about how she became a backtalker. And again, check out our survey, which will be dropping in the chat. I also want to uplift as speaking about Hazel Scott, that today in our APF Liberation Calendar, which you can also find up, dropping the link in the chat, we actually uplifted Hazel Scott's legacy today. So if you want to join Liberation Calendar for the remainder last 2 weeks, then please sign up when you can. Stay connected, share the broadcast, carry these conversations into your communities. Thank you for joining us. Stay safe and have a good night.
Kevin.
Yes.
I want to say a big shout out to Tabitha Jackson, who is the originator of the story of us. So without Tabitha, we wouldn't be here.
Thank you,
Kisses.
Tabitha.